Unpacked. We'll go live to the House of Commons after we get the latest news from Rachel Jewell.
Thanks, Matt. Good afternoon. Leaders of all the countries which make up the NATO military alliance are meeting in Madrid with the war in Ukraine top of the agenda. Secretary-General Jens Stoltenberg is promising a fundamental shift with more high readiness forces and pre-positioned equipment. Meanwhile, Boris Johnson will tell members to dig deep to modernise because he thinks the next decade will be more dangerous than the last. But the Prime Minister is being pressed by his own Defence Secretary to spend more on the UK's armed forces from 2024. The RAC says drivers have a right to know while fuel retailers have put up pump prices again despite falling wholesale costs. The average price for a litre of petrol has now hit £1.91, while for diesel it's £1.99. Rod Dennis from the RAC says retailers have no excuse for hiking prices again.
Here at the RAC, we can't see any rhyme or reason why average forecourse prices are going up still, given that the wholesale price of fuel, that's the cost which retailers buy the fuel in for, has been dropping now for several weeks. And as far as we're concerned, drivers really do have a right to know from retailers why it is prices aren't coming down.
Dame Deborah James has been described as inspirational and unfalteringly brave by the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge. The podcaster's died at the age of 40 after raising millions of pounds for charity following her bowel cancer diagnosis in 2016. Shares in Airbnb fell yesterday after it revealed its pandemic ban on parties is being made permanent. The company insists the policy put in place as a COVID public health measure has been popular and has received positive feedback. Complaints about gatherings have dropped by 44% since it came in. Around 6,600 people were suspended last year for breaking the rule. A band of rain across central areas moving east and easing. Sunny spells and showers following, some heavy in the north and west, becoming brighter and warmer in the east and southeast of England.
Across the UK, on DAB, online and on your smart speaker. Matt Chorley on Times Radio.
Very good afternoon to you. That is why Rachel Jewell is a pro, you see. Well, she'll be back with a full news roundup at past. But now it's just gone midday. It's Wednesday, so it must be time for...
PMQs Unpacked on Times Radio. Unpacking the politics and cutting through the crossfire.
Order. I call Matt Chorley and Tim Shipman.
Yes, welcome along. It's that time of the week. I'm here. Tim Shipman's here. Boris Johnson's not here.
No. He's elsewhere. He's been everywhere, though, hasn't he?
Everywhere.
Here, there, and everywhere.
He's been to Rwanda, he's been to Germany, and now he's in Spain. Do you think he'll ever come home?
Well, I mean, there's some incentive for not doing so, you would imagine. He's being lauded as a statesman on the world stage. And when he comes back here... he's just a poor sap who has to have a bloke ask him questions every Wednesday. And
in a slightly annoying way. Don't forget, you can, as well as listening along on the radio, you can watch along live on the YouTube channel. Get on the YouTubes, search for Times Radio. There are lots of people on there already. We've got greetings back in Moulton-on-the-Marsh after a sojourn in North Wales, says Patricia. Greetings from Faversham. Greetings from upstate New York. Lovely. Hello from Rio de Janeiro. Hello from Manchester, Biggleswade. Hi from Bangkok. Everyone's tuning in for Angela Rayner.
The Faversham people are almost certainly my parents, to be honest.
I've lost them now. Where have they gone? Richard Shipman. There we are.
Hello, Dad.
Good day. Well, it's better that he's tuning in than not, I suppose.
Very true.
What do you think will come up today? What will Angela Rayner do?
Well, I mean, it almost doesn't matter what subject she raises. What she will do is try to show that she's better at this lark than Keir Starmer. And that will involve having a series of aggressive questions that link together some good slogans and a punchy conclusion. And if she can pull that off, everybody will once go away muttering that it's a shame she doesn't do it every week. Last week, the listeners were workshopping a slogan for the Labour Party. You went off and saw someone from the Labour Party. Are they receptive to any of the ideas? I think they sort of accepted the idea that it was a good idea to have one. They weren't necessarily receptive to all of the ideas.
Although it turned out, I didn't realise, because we were talking a lot about it on the show last week, somebody sent me that they on social media, Labour had been using Backlog Britain, which I thought was quite a good...
okay.
Quite a lot of stuff falls under that. Somebody else has asked on the text, why, if the Prime Minister is away, does Keir Starmer also take the time off? It's just tradition, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it seemed to be sort of unfair to put a sort of, the number one up against the number two. I'm guessing Dominic Raab would probably cope with Starmer's incoming.
He'd probably prefer.
He'd much prefer Starmer, wouldn't he, than Angie Rayner coming at him. But,
yeah, so Boris Johnson's away in Spain. So it's Dominic Raab standing in. He kicked off PMQs by paying tribute to Deborah James. But then, after doing a couple of backbench questions, we can go now live to the House of Commons. This is question number 1 from Angela Rayner.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And can I also share with the Deputy Prime Minister his deepest condolences and his personal experience as we mourn the loss of Dame Deborah James, who fearlessly campaigned to inspire so many, and I'm absolutely sure there's no doubt that she saved the lives of many more. And to the family of Zara Alina, who was tragically murdered this week on the streets of Ilford. But, Mr. Speaker, I also want to congratulate the 2 honourable members, the new members, who won in the by-elections this week, including my honourable friend, the member for Wakefield.
That's
Mr.
Simon
Speaker,
Lightwood.
this week the government lost 2 by-elections in one day, the first in 3 decades. It's no wonder that the Prime Minister has fled the country and left the honourable member to carry the can. The people of Wakefield and Tiverton held their own vote of no confidence. The Prime Minister isn't just losing the room, Mr. Speaker, he's losing the country. But instead of showing some humility, he intends to limp on until the 2030s. So does he think the Cabinet will prop him up for this long?
Deputy Prime Minister.
I thank the Right Honourable Lady. I gently point out to her that we want this Prime Minister to go on a lot longer than she wants the leader of the Labour Party to go on.
Rishi Sunak particularly enjoying that on the front bench.
We've got a working majority of 75. We're focusing on delivering for the British people. Record low unemployment. Wouldn't have happened if we'd listened to the Labour Party. More policing, tougher sentencing in force this week. Police, courts, Crime and Sentencing Act. She voted against both, so did the Labour Party. And we'll protect the public from these damaging rail strikes when we've got the scene of Labour front benchers joining the picket lines.
Well, it's already better than last week.
It's already a lot more fun. When nobody's mentioned Love Island or Star Wars or anything like that. Some good gags from Angela Rayner.
Good waspish intro, and she got it back in spades, didn't she? Well done, Dominic.
Genuinely funny response.
Genuinely funny response. But then he sort of morphed into late period Tony Blair, where there wasn't a verb in sight. There was just a sort of series of weird bullet points that he was reading out.
Courts, police, crime. But already the pair of them showing that this might well shape up to be a bit more fun than or at least politically engaging. It's not, we're not just here for the fun, but both of them seeking to.
You speak for yourself, dear.
Well, I know, but you're going to be. But the sense that both of them want, they see this as an opportunity.
Exactly. All prime ministers are on the defensive. Their deputies have a chance to show what they can do, and. Starmer's been copping a bit of criticism, and Angela Rayner, as not the largest Starmer fan on the Labour front bench, will want nothing more than to sock it to him by implication.
Right, well, it's a good start. Let us know what you think. You can post comments on the YouTube channel, or you can text 87222, start your message with the word Times. It's Matt Chorley and Tim Shipman bringing you PMQs Unpacked right here on Times Radio. Let's go back to the House of Commons question 2.
Mr. Speaker, here we go again. But the truth is, what I want for my honourable friend, the leader of this opposition, is not to be the leader of the opposition, but to be the Prime Minister of this country. And to be honest, Mr. Speaker, it couldn't come quick enough. Britain can't stomach this Prime Minister for another 8 years. His own backbenchers can't stomach him for another 8 minutes. And if they continue to prop him up, Mr. Speaker, I doubt the voters will stomach him for even 8 seconds in the ballot box. Now let's imagine, Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister is still clinging on into the 2030s. Under this tax-high, low-growth Tory government, at this rate, by 2030, the British public will have endured 55 tax rises. So how many more tax rises will this government inflict on working families before he says enough is enough?
Deputy Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I think she was right first time. Mr. Speaker, I'll tell you what we're doing. Near record levels of youth unemployment, 3.8% unemployment. We're cutting taxes next month on national insurance, £330 million. We're delivering for families through the difficult times of the cost of living. What about the Labour Party? We heard yesterday what their plan is. Their plan is no plan. The leader of the Labour Party said he's wiping the slate clean. He's starting from scratch. He's only been in the job 2 years. So Tony Blair, who's actually got some experience of winning elections, says there's a gaping hole in Labour's policy offer, and all the while there's a smile creeping over her face. All the while she's revelling in it. We're getting on with serving the people of this country. She's just playing political games.
I think Dominic Raab's revelling in it a little bit as well. He's got a smile playing on his lips.
He put some Tabasco on his Weetabix this morning, didn't he? Though slightly unfortunate slip of the tongue, boasting about near record youth unemployment, which it does show that this is sort of harder than just picking up a cricket bat and bashing away sometimes.
And there was again just a bit of, we are cutting taxes, and there was just a random £330 million just dropped in from above. The thing that he was referencing is Keir Starmer speaking, I think it was a New Statesman event last night, where he said that the last Labour manifesto was gone. He's starting with a clean slate, blank sheet of paper. But as we know, lots of people in the Labour Party, Labour MPs, Labour shadow cabinet ministers would quite like a bit of detail on that piece of paper.
Well, they'd like some detail, and they'd quite like quite a lot of spending on it as well. There are people in Starmer's office who will tell you that the people who've been most agitating in the shadow cabinet against him are the people who have wanted to make big spending pledges and have been told no. So there is a tension there about what sort of Labour Party this is, and what Labour government would be offered to the public, and how much that would come to resemble what Blair's government looked like, and how much it would be, a sort of version of Boris Johnson's government that spends a bit more. And at the moment, we're not really clear where that's going to end up. And they've got a couple of months to write some stuff on that piece of paper and presumably tell us all about it at party conference.
And the reference to Tony Blair is he's got this conference this week. Is it tomorrow? I think the big conference of ideas, which definitely isn't.
It's definitely not a new party.
It's not a new party, and it's not suggesting the Labour Party has no ideas. But here was some new ideas anyway.
He's being helpful. I think the phrase we used to use during the Blair years was outrider, where people were allowed to go out and say extreme things in the hope that
just to see what happens.
Just to see what happens. And Tony Blair is now a one-man sort of motorcycle outriding. I mean, it's quite a lot of motorcycles in his outriding.
Yes, these days. Yeah. You all seem to be enjoying this on the YouTube channel. This Mark says this pair are far more entertaining, have done their homework. This is much more fun, says someone else. Matt says Dominic Raab is the most boring man in front bench politics. I mean, there's a lot of competition for that. And Jay says anyone else feels sexual tension. Whatever gets you through the day, I suppose. You can watch along on
Not
YouTube
in this
right
studio,
now.
anyway, at least.
I think they're referring to the House of Commons.
Yes, I think they probably were, but just to be clear.
This is PMQs Unpacked on Times Radio. Let's go back to the House of Commons. It's question number 3 from Angela Rayner.
Angela Rayner.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'd revel in the opportunity for the people of this country to have more than just by-elections to see what they think of this government opposite. Call a general election and see where the people are, Mr. Speaker. And this is a man who once said high levels of government taxation was hurting UK competitiveness. Now he's backing the Prime Minister who wants to put taxes up 15 times. At this rate, Mr. Speaker, working people will be paying £500 billion more in tax by 2030. Yeah. How high does he think the burden on working people should get before he says enough is enough?
Deputy Prime Minister.
We're the ones helping working people with a tax cut of £330, with the support for those on the lowest incomes, with the £650 support for 8 million on the lowest incomes, and with, frankly, the record level of investment coming into this country, from the 1 billion by Moderna for vaccines to the highest level tech investment in Europe, according to Atomico. We are the ones with a plan for low unemployment, a high wage, a high skill economy. At Labour, it's back to year zero.
Angela.
It's interesting. I think Dominic Raab is slightly demonstrating the problem the government has got. And it's a thing which you wrote about, I think, at the weekend, that Rishi Sunak is unhappy that people don't know about all the money he's been spending.
Yes, I mean, Sunak trotted off to he does these Treasury Connect things, a bit like David Cameron used to do, go and listen to the punters and see what they're interested in. And, some little old lady said to him, my bill's going up by £700. What are you going to do about it? And he said, well, we're giving you £400, and then if you're in these categories, you get even more. And she was like, oh, I had no idea. And we all obsess about this stuff, but, the government hasn't been terribly good at ramming it down everybody's throats.
Well, the trouble is, it's quite complicated.
It is complicated.
So it was 400, and then it went up, but then there's also other help for other people. He was. Well,
if you're on benefits or you're a pensioner or whatever, you get more.
And you're getting some money this week. The checks should start going out this week, and then some money later on in the year. It's not a very bang bang bang. This.
Whereas furlough was dead simple.
Yeah.
We pay 80% of your wages.
80% of your wages, and everyone can work out what that means for them. Yep. Dominic Raab, it was a sort of numbers soup.
Yeah, and he got a bit lost there, didn't he? I mean, he went from quite confident in the first two questions to clearly reading it all out and stumbling a little bit. And part of the problem is, the Cabinet does not instinctively know what this government's economic policy is either, and that's why Boris Johnson and Rishi Sunak are planning a speech which will have 6 major pledges in it, we're told. How long have we been talking about for this, that and the other?
How long have we been talking about this joint... It's always Easter, isn't it? We've been talking about this joint speech.
Well, possibly, but, the Prime Minister fleeing abroad, as Angela Rayner would put it. He's obviously not fleeing abroad.
Is it also interesting that she's seeking to needle Dominic Raab about tax rises? Because there'll be Tory MPs inwardly nodding along with her on that.
Yeah, absolutely, and it's a good tactic in the chamber. And Labour people who don't necessarily like tax cuts will be nodding along and agreeing that she's giving him a hard time and rather enjoying it too. So it's a double-edged.
It's a win-win.
It's a win-win for Angie.
Right, PMQs Unpacked continues. Let's go back to the House of Commons for question number 4 from Angela Rayner.
The Speaker, if he tends to empathise with those struggling with the Tory cost of living crisis, when it was he himself who once said that food bank users are not in poverty but simply have a cash flow problem. The honourable member doesn't. He spent over £1 million in 9 months on private jets. It shows how out of touch this government is, Mr. Speaker. But at this rate, by 2030, 1 million more people will be using food banks. How many more working people will be pushed into poverty by his Prime Minister before he says enough is enough?
I tell you, if the Labour Party, if the Right Honourable Lady wants to help working people, they should be clear in standing up against these militant, reckless strikes by RMT. The Right Honourable Lady has flip-flopped. The Right Honourable Lady has flip-flopped all over the place when it came to these strikes. First she said they were lose-lose. Then she tweeted workers were left with no choice. When she was asked by the BBC, straight question, she's normally a straight-shooting politician, do you like the RMT? She said, I'm going to have to go now. I've got a train to catch. She talks about working people. She talks about working people. Where was the Right Honourable Lady when the comrades were on the picket line last Thursday?
Raab just winked at Angela
Where was she when the Labour front bench were joining them rather than standing up for the public?
Question, then.
She was at the Glyndebourne Music Festival, sipping champagne, listening to opera. Champagne socialism is back in the Labour Party.
Well, that might be one of the most appalling things I've seen in the dispatch box. Dominic Raab winking at Angela Rayner across the dispatch box.
It's quite a meta event, this, isn't it? It's just sort of they both enjoyed themselves. Yeah, I mean, some good research digging by Conservative Central Office there, getting stuck into Rayner. She had some sort of historic comments about food banks, and he had rather more sort of eye-catching recent material. Though the pronunciation of BBC as the BBC was also interesting. It sounds like a body of water named after Justin Bieber.
One thing I noticed, I think she's done it twice now, Angela Rayner ending a question with "enough is enough," which I think, was that not one of our suggested slogans last week?
That could be that. And at this rate, she keeps using as well.
Yeah.
So there's a sort of, it's not poetry, but there's a kind of rhythm and timbre and, all internal call and response going on here. It's quite pleasing in a kind of, as a piece of rhetoric.
Yeah. No, she did. Actually, I think maybe that's the difference. Is that what she's saying is probably less.
What she's saying is sort of
structured.
hackneyed, classic Labour lefty politician says.
The content is probably less.
Food banks, terrible. Taxes, rah. Poverty. But she's doing it with sufficient energy and gusto that it sounds a lot more sort of, poor old Sakir. He's not even here, and we're having a go at him.
Enough is enough.
Enough is enough.
Number 5 is Angela Rayner.
Well, Mr. Speaker, that says a lot about the party opposite. I'll tell them a few things about militancy. It's this government that are acting in a militant way. And while they should have been at the negotiating table, they were at the banqueting table getting hundreds of thousands squeezed out of their donors instead of dealing with the crisis. And he talks about trains. No one can get trains because of his failed transport minister, Mr. Speaker. And I tell you, he has a stronger stomach than his...
I think we'll just have a little quiet. I want to hear the question, and you'll also want to hear the answer. Angela Rayner.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I think it's rather ironic that you have to intervene because of the baying mob here when they've got people through their noisy protest laws being protesting out on the street. The thing is, Mr. Speaker, they don't like it when the public say what they think of them. But I tell you, the honourable gentleman opposite has a stronger stomach than his colleagues behind him.
Honestly, I want to hear the question, I want to hear the answer. And I hate to say it.
Well, stop interrupting it then, man.
Think about them for once instead of yourselves. Angela Rayner.
Third time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And when they were asked about the absent Prime Minister's plans to stick around until 2030, one honourable member opposite said he'd lost the plot. Another one said anyone with half a brain would realise how dire things are. And a former Conservative leader said that the country would be better off under new leadership. And now the Prime Minister is at war with his own Defence Secretary after confirming he will break his manifesto pledge and increasing defence spending. Under this government, Britain is set to have less troops, less planes and less ships. The only thing the Prime Minister's interested in is defending his own job. Just how many more troops have to lose their jobs before he finally says enough is enough?
There we go again.
There we are. Enough is enough. It's
Mr.
definitely
Speaker.
a slogan they're using.
In fact, there's a £24 billion increase for armed forces. Spending on the armed forces is rising to 2.3% of GDP, again making us the largest military spender in Europe. And frankly, we'll take no lessons from the Right Honourable Lady when it comes to security in this country. First thing she did when she became an MP, 2016, voted against Trident, leaving us exposed. And she was campaigning for the Right Honourable Member for Islington North to be Prime Minister, someone who would take us out of NATO.
I'll do a reference to Jeremy Corbyn there. Somebody's been listening to... They are definitely listening to Times Radio, because now Angela Rayner is quoting some of the MPs that we had off the record on the show on Monday, including the long-serving West Country MP. He said Boris Johnson had lost the plot by suggesting he was going to go on and on and on until the 2030. But then, like you said, Dominic Raab, the Tories have been rooting around right into the dim and distant past. 6 years ago, what Angela Rayner voted on Trident.
Yeah, that's right. And she had a decent line on, they should be at the negotiating table and they were at the banqueting table. But yeah, there was quite a lot of noise there, wasn't there? The questions are becoming just sort of portmanteau buckets full of words at the moment. But it'd be interesting, she's kept the themes going. She's got a bit of sloganeering going. It'll be interesting to see if she can round it off with a bit of a flourish.
With another enough is enough. Nick's been in touch. Isn't Lindsay Hoyle useless? Wow. Stop butting in. We can hear perfectly. This is the House of Commons, not a public library.
Well, this is the thing. I mean, in the chamber, it's deafeningly loud, of course, but most people know that if they're pretty near a microphone, they can make themselves heard. And the more experienced parliamentarians do tend to plough on. I remember Michael Gove doing that no confidence debate, and the Labour ranks were just absolutely baying in his face, and he just ploughed merrily on, knowing that the microphones were picking it all up. Hoyle does seem to like, a little bit like Burko, to have something to say at least once a week, even when it's not necessarily wholly necessary.
Well, let's see if they can both get through their final exchange without Lindsay Hoyle interrupting. Enough is enough. It's question number 6 from Angela Waiter.
Mr. Speaker, talking about NATO, where was the honourable member when the situation in Afghanistan on a sun lounger? That's where the honourable member was. I take no lectures from the honourable member when it comes to doing your job. The Prime Minister said he felt no shame over the by-election defeats. He said his government have been quite exceptional. Well, I agree that they've been exceptional, all right. An exceptional record on stagnant wages, rising poverty and broken promises. And the Prime Minister wants to drag this out until 2030. And how much more can he stomach before he finds the guts, Mr. Speaker? How many more tax rises? How many more families drove into poverty? And how many manifesto pledges broken? I hope for the sake of the British public, Mr. Speaker, that we never find out. And when will the Deputy Prime Minister finally grow a backbone and tell the Prime Minister the game is up?
Mr. Speaker, I can't help thinking that Right Honourable Lady is auditioning for the leadership contest on that side, not really referring to anything on this side. She's got the support of the honourable member.
Dominic Raab is smiling.
Look, I'll tell you what we're doing. We're putting in place the policies to grow our economy to help...
Mr Murray.
Oh, Lindsay Hoyle again.
Questions already for Scotland. It's not continued. It's not your debate. Come on.
Mr. Speaker, he was just announcing his support for the Right Honourable Lady in the forthcoming... We're putting in places the economic plan to help people with the cost of living. The Labour leader is getting ready for year zero. We're the ones supporting Ukraine with sanctions on Russia, with military support. The Honourable Lady voted to abolish Trident. We're the ones making the streets safer, more police and tougher sentencing under the Police Crime Sentencing Act in force this week. She voted against both. They got no plan. They're not fit to govern, Mr. Speaker.
Oh, that was a slight fizzling damp squib from Dominic Raab at the end. I was sort of expecting a big comeback.
Well, it was a little bit underwhelming for both of them, wasn't it? You know, she sort of said, you know, when are you going to get rid of Boris? She could have used enough is enough then.
That's what
frankly.
I thought. When you're going to get a backbone and tell the Prime Minister, enough is enough.
Yeah.
Is enough.
So
is
that's
enough.
a sort of...
Who sang that? Can we find that?
It's a sort of failure.
There's an election anthem in that.
I mean, look, they both did quite well. Raab was certainly more upbeat and slick than sometimes you expect him to be. She had the energy you always expect, but actually combined it with a bit of rhetorical nous.
He's an interesting one, isn't he, Dominic Raab? Because he's quite good. That was quite a good performance by any measure. And yet other times he sort of blunders into saying, particularly when he's on the telly and he's doing interviews and things, he just blunders into saying the most monumentally stupid... I mean, The Sea is actually closed is obviously
up there,
a highlight
yes.
Of his back catalogue. But, in the other time he just looks very panicked and nervy on, in public situations. But clearly Boris Johnson sees something in him, which is why he's the deputy.
Yeah, I think he saw in him a bloke who wasn't going to try and do him in. And he also saw in him a man who demanded the job on pain of resignation.
Yeah.
Takes all sorts, doesn't it? Raab, is a very competent, usually a safe pair of hands. But when he cocks up, my God, he tends to do it in style. And Afghanistan was the classic example of that. the absolute classic thing that someone who's normally a safe pair of hands would not have made a Horlicks of, and that, I think, did his reputation quite a bit of damage. But yeah, he'll have done himself some favours there today, but I don't think anyone seriously thinks he's likely to run for the leadership again. The interesting one was seeing Rishi Sunak sitting there enjoying himself.
He looked like he was having a whale of a time.
Yeah, and you sort of wonder how adept he would be with some of those quips and whether he can sound brutal enough. It has been suggested in the past that it'd be rather fun to see these things on rotation, and certainly if there was a leadership contest on, it would be very fun to see half a dozen of them have a crack at this and see how they get on. Because it's not an insignificant part of the job in terms of the public-facing aspects of it, at least. The question is, if we had to listen to that every week, would we be quite so tickled? And I suspect we wouldn't.
Yeah,
because
the grass is always greener.
It was quite a lot of noise and not a lot of light.
Looking at the comments you're posting on YouTube, a lot of you have enjoyed that. Brittany's bust.
Everything's bust, or Boris's bust, or whatever, becomes a sort of, all it needs now is Nick Clegg to do a song for YouTube, and we're away.
Well, you could probably put it on Facebook these days. Listen, well, enough is enough of PMQs Unpacked, the front bench exchanges. Somebody's posted Dominic Raab's wink on Twitter. So if you are listening on the radio and not watching on YouTube, you can go and see that if you really want to.
I mean, if Ian Blackford doesn't sing his questions, we're going to be disappointed.
You're going to be very disappointed. Stay tuned. We'll do the best of the rest and probably play a bit more Donna Summer after we get the latest news from Alex Morgan.
Across the UK, on DAB, online and on your smart speaker. This is Times Radio.
Thanks, Matt. Good afternoon. Boris Johnson says Vladimir Putin is getting more NATO and not less as a result of his actions in Ukraine. NATO leaders are currently meeting in Madrid, with that summit dominated by a resurgent Russia. Meanwhile, the Defence Secretary says that Russia's invasion of Ukraine will mean the UK must allocate more money to the armed forces by the middle of the decade. Ben Wallace says we'll need to increase spending if Britain is to stay a global leader. Back here, the Deputy Prime Minister has denied that taxes are due to increase further amid the cost of living crisis. Dominic Raab has been standing in for Boris Johnson, who is speaking at that NATO conference in Madrid. Mr Raab responded to suggestions the government is to charge the taxpayer more in the coming months.
We're cutting taxes next month on national insurance, £330 million. We're delivering for families through the difficult times of the cost of living. What about the Labour Party? We heard yesterday what their plan is. Their plan is no plan. The leader of the Labour Party said he's wiping the slate clean. He's starting from scratch. He's only been in the job 2 years.
But the deputy leader of the Labour Party, Angela Rayner, hit back, accusing the government of failing to negotiate to avoid strikes and failing to help people struggling with the cost of living crisis. The UK is to impose sanctions on Russia's second richest man and a cousin of Vladimir Putin. The government says the restrictions are part of the latest measures targeting allies of the Russian president. There are also new sanctions for a group of individuals and companies in Russia for their involvement in repressing civilians and supporting the Assad regime in Syria. The RAC says drivers have a right to know why fuel retailers have inexplicably put up pump prices again, despite falling wholesale costs. The average price for a litre of petrol hit £1.91, while for diesel it's £1.99. The RAC says there's absolutely no reason for this latest hike, as the wholesale price of both fuels has been falling for weeks. This afternoon, a band of rain across central areas, moving east and easing. Sunny spells and showers will follow that. Some heavy in the north and the west, while east and southeast England will become dry and warm. Let's bring you up to date with the sport.
Andy Murray's second-round opponent at Wimbledon has referred to the two-time winner as one of England's best players. The big-serving American John Isner was speaking ahead of their match later.
I was watching him a little bit on the TV in the locker room, and packed house, all cheering for him. You know, England's best players ever.
Isner will try to beat the Scot for the first time in 9 appearances in today's final match on centre court. Murray's one of 6 British players in singles action today. Meanwhile, the Australian Nick Kyrgios says he spat towards someone in the Wimbledon crowd because they were disrespecting him. He's criticised some spectators' behaviour during his 5-set first-round win over British wildcard Paul Jubb. Kyrgios was also involved in a number of disputes with line judges, calling one a snitch, and he doesn't regret it.
The disrespect is all these spectators have come to see a full stadium of Nick Kyrgios and my opponent, and she found it relevant to go to run to the umpire at 30 love and make it about her. No one was there to see her today.
It's expected Kyrgios will be fined. The All England club is yet to comment. To golf, where Brooks Koepka says he respects the opinion of Rory McIlroy, who recently called the American duplicitous for joining the lucrative LIV Series. The 4-time major winner will make his debut in the Saudi-backed competition in Portland, Oregon this week. Koepka had said questions about the controversial tournament were casting a black cloud at the recent US Open, but he's now a fully signed-up player.
Look, he's entitled to his opinion. He can think whatever he wants. He's going to do what's best for him and his family. I'm going to do what's best for me and my family. And can't hate on anybody for that. And like I said, opinions change, man.
An experimental Ireland rugby union side have warmed up for Saturday's first test with New Zealand by losing to the Maori All Blacks in Hamilton. Andy Farrell's team were beaten 32-17 by the representative side. 5 uncapped players started the match. And female racing driver Jamie Chadwick has questioned whether women are physically able to compete in Formula One. 5-time W Series champion Chadwick wants to be the guinea pig, but says she doesn't know exactly what women are capable of in the sport.
This is Times Radio.
OK, everybody, we need to stop taking on new patients.
Sarah's dental practice is expanding to cope with demand, so there are roles that urgently need filling.
But we can refer people to our new practice when it's ready.
Indeed can help her find great people fast.
I need Indeed.
Indeed you do. Screen for quality candidates using Indeed assessments to make sure they have the experience your job needs. To start hiring, visit Indeed.com/try today.
Matt Chorley, mid-morning on Times Radio.
Very good afternoon to you. It's Matt Chorley bringing you PMQs Unpacked. We did the front bench exchanges and played some Donna Summer. Just before the news. We might get a little bit of that in again before the end. Tim Shipman still here, Chief Political Commentator of the Sunday Times. You can still watch along on the YouTubes. Now we are going back to the House of Commons to see if, as Tim suggested, Ian Blackford chooses to sing his question. Let's take a listen.
Mr. Speaker, Scotland's First Minister has set the date and started the campaign. Our nation will have its independence referendum on the 19th of October 2023. The reality is Scotland has already paid the price for not being independent. Westminster governments we did not vote for, imposing policies we don't support, breaking international law, dragging Scotland through a damaging Brexit we didn't vote for, and delivering deep austerity cuts. Contrast that with our European neighbours, who have greater income equality, lower poverty rates and higher productivity. Mr. Speaker, why not Scotland? In the weeks and months ahead, we will make the positive case for independence. Will the opposition, if they can, make the case for continued Westminster rule?
Deputy Prime Minister.
Can I thank the honourable gentleman? It's always good to see him in his place. No, genuinely, it's good to see him in his place. It's not the right time for another referendum, given the challenges that we face as one United Kingdom. And I think, and he referred to some of the challenges in Scotland, but I think actually the people of Scotland want their two governments to work together, and we are keen, willing, enthusiastic to do so.
That was a surprisingly polite, sensible response from Donny Well.
Yeah, and I thought when he said it was good to see him in his place that he was sort of talking about putting him in his place, but No,
because it's interesting.
Just being nice.
And it's Ian Blackford ignored the convention about if the Prime Minister's not there, then you send in the deputies, and he's gone and done it himself.
Yes, I think anyone who knows anything about the internal politics of the SNP knows that that is not a happy ship factionally, and that Ian Blackford would be unlikely to relinquish his position. But yes, for a question and answer that could have been quite heated, it wasn't, and I think that's instructive actually about how the government probably plans to approach this.
That's it. That's true. So,
which is to say,
and basically what Dominic Raab's done there is he hasn't given the SNP a clip for Twitter.
Correct, and their approach to this whole let's have another referendum is going to be, well, that's all great, but not now, and there's a lot of other things to worry about. And if they're answering it slightly more punchily, they'll say, you're responsible for a lot of those things that are going wrong in Scotland, and why don't you deal with those instead? But at least to kick off this debate, he was pretty polite. But I think the view in London is that it's better to take the sting out of it rather than have a blooming great row, which is probably what the SNP wants.
And agitate them, it would probably frustrate the SNP, but that's not what they're doing. Next we are going back to the House of Commons for the Labour MP Rosie Duffield. Let's take a listen.
So far this year, 52 women have been killed in the UK. Our rights to free speech, safe spaces, fairness in sport, and even the words we use to describe our own bodies are all under threat. Will the Deputy Prime Minister send a clear signal, as some of his Cabinet colleagues have done this week, that Britain respects the rights of women? And will he accept the cross-party amendment to his forthcoming Bill of Rights, which enshrines a woman's right to choose in law?
Deputy Prime Minister.
Can I thank the Honourable Lady for her question? Can I also just say at the outset what huge respect I personally have for her with the way she stood up for women's rights. And frankly, the appalling harassment, trolling and bullying that she's faced. The position, as she knows, is settled in UK law in relation to abortion. It's decided by honourable members across this House. It's an issue of conscience. I don't think there is a strong case for change. What I wouldn't want to do is find ourselves with the greatest respect in the US position where this is being litigated through the courts rather than settled, as it is now settled, by honourable members in this House.
Again, Dominic Raab reaching across. Rosie Duffield has had an awful lot of abuse because of the position she's taken on women's rights, including from lots of people on her own side.
Yes, absolutely. Raab, of course, notoriously once declared himself not a feminist and offended lots of people. So that was interesting on both counts.
Bigots he called feminist, didn't he?
I think he did in his pre-ministerial days. He would only make such comments privately now, I suspect. No, it was interesting because there's been some talk of Rosie Duffield crossing the floor, so bad as she had it from her own party. And interestingly, again there, had Boris Johnson been answering that question, one could well imagine that he would have mentioned that the leader of the Labour Party doesn't know how to define a woman. Raab didn't feel the need to do that. He just gave her a warm welcome, but I think perfectly reasonable response. There's a lot of people rushing around getting very upset about the Roe versus Wade being overturned in America and constitutional abortion rights being overturned. It's understandable that lots of people are concerned about that because they think America is a country like ours. In some regards it is, but that's not how we've done things here. And I think a lot of people would have some sympathy with what Raab said there about us not wanting to go down that path. Duffield successfully signalled her support for abortion rights but got a fairly grown-up answer saying it's not actually a problem here and it's up to MPs to decide it. Of course, in America it sort of isn't. It's up to the judges to decide it.
And it's a reminder that luckily, in lots of ways, Britain is different to America. We might share a language, but the politics is very different. Right, because I think we've got time for one more question now. This is from the Labour MP Belrabir Addy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In their efforts to pursue a hostile environment, the Home Office routinely tears families apart and breaks human rights and equalities legislation. They're reported to be sending up yet another charter deportation flight to Nigeria and Ghana, In Pride Month, they'll be deporting LGBT asylum seekers, fleeing homophobia, and grandmothers and mothers of British children who have lived in this country for over 25 years. Given that the Home Office repeatedly get it wrong and end up having to take people off these flights, can the Deputy Prime Minister tell me how many people have been removed from this flight already, and when will they stop these inhumane deportation charter flights?
The Prime Minister.
No, thank you, Honourable Lady. Look, she's right at least in one respect. Of course, people who come here need to be treated decently and humanely. We're absolutely committed to that. We also need to make sure that we cut down the illegal routes, and those that are here that committed serious offences can be returned home. And the crucial thing, and I'm working with the Home Secretary, is to make sure we do both of those things. But what we can't allow is illegal routes to flourish into this country, otherwise we'll just attract more. And we cannot allow people who commit serious offences in this country to stay and continue to pose a threat to the public.
Once again, a more emollient tone from Dominic Raab than we probably would have expected from Boris Johnson on an issue which is determined to use as a big wedge issue.
Well, sometimes wedge issues work best when you sound reasonable.
Yeah.
Because you then want the other side to sound unreasonable. But yeah, that was a pretty, that's why Dominic Raab has the job he has, and that's why he got a lot of credit from his cabinet colleagues when Boris Johnson was lying in a hospital bed at the start of COVID. He got on with things in a fairly low-key and reasonably effective manner, and I think a lot of people will be leaving the Tory benches relatively content today.
Yeah.
Equally, Labour people would have thought Angie Rayner gave a decent fist of things, and if Labour are edging towards coming up with a slogan that works,
well, we've done it. We've sorted it.
Well, exactly, and
In an ever-changing world, it's vital to stay on top of the latest issues, events and news. Times Radio Breakfast is your essential morning briefing with incisive analysis from some of the most respected names in politics, culture and entertainment. Plus, get the latest insight from a range of business leaders every week. Times Radio Breakfast with Asma Mir and Stig Abel. Tomorrow morning from 6 on Times Radio with Service Now. Because when digital solutions work, the world works. That's why the world works with Service Now.
Times Radio with Matt Chorley.
Yes, it's true. Yes, it's true. I am happy to be stuck with
Times Radio playlist today has been very good. So why are we playing this? Do you remember? It seems like a long time ago now. When have you got stuck? That's the question we've been asking, because the boy got stuck in a sewer, but he's all right. He's been fat. Mark says, I got stuck back in the 70s when young bird watchers used to collect eggs, reaching for a jackdaw egg, overbalanced, ended up upside down in a hollow tree trunk. John says, I learned as a Boy Scout how to get someone's head out of railings. You turn the body round, facing upwards, then come out face pointing same way as went in. Desolated that 40 years later I've never had the chance to play the hero. Louis says, once got stuck in a field that became increasingly boggy when going for a country walk. Once properly in the mud, thought it was too late to turn back, so resorted to climbing a tree. that went over a river and a barbed wire fence. Ripped trousers on said fence. Not my finest moment. Peter says, well, my wife was almost 9 months pregnant. She decided to do some last-minute gardening. Sitting on the sofa, I watched her wave enthusiastically for quite a while before realising she'd sunk inescapably into the soil up to the top of her wellies. Andrew says, as a shop assistant in Marks and Spencer's in 1994, I was persuaded to put my tongue onto a steel pallet in the deep freezer. 45 minutes later, and the by now very panicked older boys eventually freed me again with warm water from the canteen. Someone on Twitter says, I got stuck in a frock in the changing rooms at Zara, half in, half out. Had to ask the assistant for help. Colin says, I got my feet stuck in drift mud at the beach when I was about 6 years old. Waved my arms and shouted frantically at my parents.